you were also the original guy who uncovered Epstein's little black book and made it public.
I was the guy that published Epstein's black book, yes. I had the Franklin scandal got published in 2009, 2010, and I'd spent 7 years on it. And it was dark. I mean, I went as deep into pedophile network as someone can go. I interviewed like one of the Blackmail photographers, and then Henry, who was interacting with various CIA assets. Like that network, like the Epstein network, it's intelligence. I mean, it's used to compromise people. So I went very, very deep into that network, and what I found was unbelievably horrific. So that book took a lot out of me, and we just couldn't get people to buy it. People thought, nah, the government would never be part of a network. This is before Epstein. Mm-hmm. And Epstein at this point was a lone pedophile. There wasn't a network. He wasn't pandering. That's what the newspaper said he was basically a lone pedophile. And I went down there in 2012. I started looking into it in 2011. Then I went down there in 2012, started knocking on doors and doing my thing. And I ended up with this black book. And then I brought it back to New York City because I'd been pitching Epstein, and magazines really didn't want to deal with it at all. And I figured, well, once I get the black book, they're going to want to do something with it. And so I was pitching the black book, and no one wanted to touch it. Finally, Gawker published it in 2015, and then the floodgates opened on the black book. I mean, tons of ink have been dumped on the black book, and I think only 2 publications have given me credit for it. It's kind of funny.
So you were knocking on doors, and you got a hold of it. You glossed over that pretty fast. Whose doors were you knocking on, and where specifically did you get the book?
I mean, there are sources that I can't give out, but I was talking to anybody that I thought was affiliated with Epstein. And
you're talking about like big shots, like high level Wall Street people? Are you talking about?
I'm talking more about attorneys that were affiliated with it. And then when I got the black book, the black book has like about 150 victims.
And can you say where you got the black book?
It really wouldn't. No, I can't.
Okay,
it's
fair enough.
As much as I'd like to. The thing about
I gotta ask.
Well, I'm very good at getting documents that no one else has gotten. Like when I wrote the Franklin scandal, I got there was a grand jury, and all that stuff was sealed. Okay. And I got all the testimony and all the exhibits from the grand jury. I'm one of those guys that people kind of trust. I mean, I think I look trustworthy. I mean,
yeah, totally.
Anyway,
yeah,
and I'm very trustworthy. But the reason why people give me stuff is because I don't tell them where I got it. So.
Yeah, absolutely. You got to maintain that credibility.
But anyway, so I started calling these victims, and they started talking about being flown around. And I realized this guy wasn't a lone pedophile. He was at the helm of a pedophile network. He was flying these young girls to very powerful guys. Mm-hmm. And that's the story that I came back with in New York City. That's the story that I pitched. And people were just frightened of it. And I'd had one go around with, I was pitching the Franklin scandal, which is basically almost identical to Epstein. The Franklin scandal is about Republicans, little boys. And Epstein is, for the most part, Democrats, little girls. So I was pitching the Franklin scandal, and this is at a point I had a lot of connections in the mainstream media, and I could pitch it to just about, I could pitch it to a lot of different editors. So I was pitching the Franklin scandal to these editors, and I would look into their eyes, and I could see the wheels turning. They were up against cognitive dissonance, and basically what was going on in their minds was, this is a really horrible story. All these kids getting abused and it covered up. We're going to need to help Nick Bryant. Or I can just write Nick Bryant off as crazy right now, and then I can have a nice dinner with my family.
Not worry about losing my job.
Yeah. So every editor, and I had a lot of connections in, I live in New York City. I've lived there for 30 years. So I had a lot of connections in the media, but And I was really surprised. You know, I knew that most of them would be spineless,
Right.
but there was only one guy that helped me, that had juice in publishing. There was only one guy.
Who's that?
His name was Malachi McCourt. His brother had written Angela's Ashes, and Malachi had published 5 or 6 books. And he was very popular. He was a very popular writer, and just he was a great wit. And he tried to help me with it, and he couldn't get any traction. So,
And how did you eventually get it in front of Gawker?
well, John Cook.
Or we're talking about Epstein. You're talking about Franklin's scandal, right?
Yeah, but now we can jump between Franklin and because they're very similar. I hooked up with John Cook, and he was the editor-in-chief of Gawker at that point. And he was willing to do it. And he was willing to, because at that point I had passenger manifests too. I was the first guy to really have passenger manifests also that had like Clinton's name on it and, you know, Kevin Spacey and Alan Dershowitz. I mean, I had the passenger manifest too. So Gawker was willing to do that. It's unfortunate that Gawker has since been sued into oblivion because Gawker.
Hulk Hogan and Peter Thiel.
Yeah, they outed Peter Thiel as gay, and Peter's kind of a fascist, and he said to everybody, anybody that sues Gawker, I will pay for it.
Right.
So that's how Gawker got taken down. And it's really unfortunate because Gawker would publish guys like me that no one else would touch.
Right.
So it's really unfortunate that Gawker got taken down.
And you were saying earlier something about there's something significant about somebody being in the black book and being circled versus just being in the black book.
Yes. The people that are circled, okay, how the black book came to exist was Alfredo Rodriguez stole all of Epstein's numbers, and which is the black book.
Who was Alfredo Rodriguez?
He was Epstein's house manager.
Okay. And
he was asked by attorneys that were deposing him if he had any extra information. He was saying no. His plan was to sell the black book. So he got in touch with one of the attorneys that was representing some of Epstein's victims in civil suits and said, I've got the Holy Grail, and I'll sell it to you for, I think, like $50,000. And the attorney went to the FBI, and then the FBI did a sting where they set Rodriguez up, and he sold the book to a female FBI agent.
No.
Yeah. So that's how and then I got the black book from some people who got it from the FBI.
Holy shit.
But Rodriguez said that the people that were circled were in cahoots with Epstein on the, as far as the child abuse.
So the FBI are the ones that did the circles?
No.
Epstein was.
Rodriguez.
Oh, Rodriguez.
Rodriguez did the circles, yeah. And Trump's name is circled. Now, Clinton's name is not circled, but Epstein's got 25 contact numbers for him.
Yeah, he's also got 25 contact numbers for our RFK Jr.
No, not that many.
I thought it was pretty damn close.
No, not that many.
How many was it for him?
I don't know. I think like about.
And he
7 or 8.
also addressed this in the media. Yeah. Like he said that, I forget what it was, the wife or something was like going down to Palm Beach.
A rock hunt or something like that.
A rock hunt. Oh, yeah. Wow. That's fascinating.
But that's how the black book ultimately got into my possession, is the FBI did a sting on it, and then some people got the black book from the FBI, and then I got the black book.
Yeah, what's the latest on Glain? What happened to her? What's she doing right now? What's going to happen to her?
Glain, I mean, here's the thing with that. Glain trafficked children for 20 to 25 years. And that's a heavy sentence for trafficking. If you get busted trafficking a child, if you get indicted, you're looking at 15 years to life. And she trafficked multiple children for multiple years, and she was indicted on one count of child trafficking, where she should have been looking at the rest of her life in prison. She ended up getting 20 years, but she's already in a dormitory. which is that's about as leisurely as you're going to get in a federal prison. And inmates that have been there for years that are on the verge of getting released go to the dormitories. But Glain Maxwell jumped into a dormitory after 2 or 3 years. So she's already being treated very well. And she's trying to find loopholes to get out of prison.
Yeah. I'd be shocked. I wouldn't be surprised if she find out a way to get out soon in the next 2 to 3 years.
Well, what she's doing is, okay, the feds came up with a non-prosecution agreement with Epstein. And the deal was that Epstein would pay back the girls that he would give them settlements. But everybody else that had anything to do with Epstein would not get indicted, was completely exonerated. The procurers were exonerated, the perpetrators were exonerated. And this was the deal that Alexander Acosta worked out. And then it was sealed because it was such a dirty deal that they didn't want anybody to know that it was sealed. And ultimately, there were attorneys that were filing civil lawsuits against Jeffrey Epstein. And the Palm Beach police or Palm Beach newspaper ultimately they were able to get that unsealed. And then what it showed was that everybody that was affiliated with Epstein was completely exonerated from children, from the procurers to the perps. Americans do not want to believe that Jeffrey Epstein was covered up by the government. A lot of, I mean, it's really in our face that the government covered up Jeffrey Epstein, the federal government, from Alexander Acosta being told to stand down to William Barr, and it's going on now with the U.S. Attorney Damian Williams. He was the guy that put Glain Maxwell on trial, and he was nominated by Biden, and he is the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York, which is probably the most powerful federal law enforcement officer in New York City. And it's a post that, I mean, cabinet members and judges and a lot of people have been that. If you're the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York, that's very prestigious. Yes. It doesn't get any more prestigious in federal law enforcement.
Now, what does it mean that he was the one who prosecuted Glain?
Okay, so he was the guy. Glain Maxwell's trial was carefully choreographed. They only called 4 witnesses, and those 4 witnesses had only been by Maxwell and Epstein.
Okay.
They didn't know
other people.
They didn't know about these other power brokers, and let me reframe myself. They didn't know about these other. They hadn't been by the power brokers, so when they testified, they could only testify about Epstein and Maxwell. And what's really interesting, Damian Williams. I mean, he's part of the. He's part of a very corrupt Democratic machine. He is the guy that is leading the P. Diddy investigation right now. He's the guy that's
Damian Williams.
Damian Williams. The guy that covered up Epstein and Maxwell is the same guy that's going to be covering up P. Diddy. Those warrants that were executed in Los Angeles and also in Miami on P. Diddy's home, where they came out with a bunch of electronics. Okay, what's amazing is they were launched by Damian Williams. Now, why would a guy in New York City be executing search warrants in L.A. and Miami? And I'll tell you why. It's because I believe that P. Diddy, well, his homes were wired for audiovisual blackmail. Yes. And there were politicians and big-time celebrities and athletes. And I believe that people got compromised at his parties. And there has to be damage control. And Damian Williams is the damage control. Because Damian Williams is prosecuting that case, we know the fix is in. We don't know exactly what the fix is going to be, but I'll give you an idea of what the fix is going to be.
Okay.
P. Diddy is going to go down maybe some other lower echelon guys are going to go down, but none of the people that were. And there's been 8 lawsuits launched at P. Diddy, 8 civil lawsuits.
Okay.
2 of them were minors at the time. And then Little Rod, the 5th lawsuit, he was a hip hop producer. He said that P. Diddy always had minors. There were always minors there at his parties. And P. Diddy had these, like, what he called freak-offs, where I guess it was like a Roman bacchanal kind of a thing. So what's really, when you dig into P. Diddy's past, it's kind of interesting because he started Bad Boy Records with Clive Davis. Mm-hmm. And Clive Davis is a dirty, dirty guy. And people don't really know this about Clive Davis. There was a documentary about Clive Davis, and it showed that he was this benign octogenarian. I mean, it was like an infomercial. But Clive Davis, what's amazing, if you look into his criminal past, it's kind of mind-boggling. He's been indicted 3 times by the IRS for not paying his taxes, and then he's been indicted 3 times for fraud, not paying his taxes. Mm-hmm. And what payola is it's against the law, but it's radio station record companies giving money to radio stations to play
music.
Yeah. And it was outlawed in 1960. And Clive Davis was, when he was president of ABC Records, he was in the biggest payola swindle of all time. It was like $250,000 that they were giving to radio stations. Wow. And then what's really interesting, now we're not done with Clive Davis yet. There was a Genovese guy named Patsy Falcone who got busted with bringing 22 pounds of heroin into the United States. And the feds started digging into Falcone, and then they found that he was in charge of all these shell companies. And he was in business with Clive Davis. Clive Davis, as the president of ABC Records, was giving money to these shell companies that Falcone oversaw, and then they were dividing the proceeds. So with all this criminality that I have told you that Clive Davis has perpetrated, he has not spent 1 day in jail. Mm. The dude has not spent 1 day in jail. So he was the guy that started Bad Boy Records with P. Diddy in 1993.
After all the investigations and all the stuff that you've read about Epstein in your career, what is your overall 30,000-foot view of who he was and who he worked for and what his motives were?
Well, the Epstein network is very similar to the network I wrote about in the Franklin scandal. Mm-hmm. And basically, Epstein, now it's really tough to know. I've got a picture. Epstein went to Interlochen. It's an arts camp in northern Michigan one summer. And I've got the pictures of Epstein at that, and you can check it out on my blog. Right. But there's a little, I believe that there's a little William Barr at Interlochen at the same time. William Barr was
Bill Barr's dad? Bill Barr. Okay. Yeah.
Bill Barr's dad hired Epstein.
At Drexel. Or not Drexel. I'm sorry. The Dalton school, right?
Yes. 7 years later, and Epstein was completely unqualified. He was a college dropout.
Right.
There's no way that he should have been hired. Dalton is the preeminent preparatory school in America, or certainly one of them. And there's no way that Jeffrey Epstein should have been hired. But you can take a look at these pictures that I have, and you can compare them to Bill Barr and Bill Barr now.
Is this?
There he is. That's it. Right there. There's Epstein right up there.
Oh, this is the art school?
Yes, Interlochen.
Interlochen. Okay. What year was this?
This was in 1967. And
that's Epstein on the right?
That's Epstein standing up.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, now I believe that this is Bill Barr. What's bizarre, though, is that this is a yearbook that doesn't have any names. And Interlochen has denied that Bill Barr attended their camp. They can't deny that Jeffrey Epstein attended it because he built a lodge. He gave them $500,000 to build the Jeffrey Epstein lodge.
Zoom in on him, on Epstein standing there, Steve. Wow, I've never seen this photo. Oh, nope, you had it there for a second, and then you zoomed out. There you go. Yeah, can you zoom in
that's
more on
the
that?
extent.
Oh, that's as far as you can go.
Yeah.
There's
he's
there's
got
a
the-
little Jeffrey Epstein.
Wow, man, that's
Now,
wild.
but check it out. Now, if you go to my website, you'll see that I've got a picture of little William Barr and big William Barr. It's right below these pictures.
Oh, right
There we go. Now, check it out. Are these
Look
not
at that.
Are these not the
Uncanny.
same guys?
Wow, dude. So Bill Barr, William Barr's dad, was the head of
Dalton
School.
Yeah.
That school was really fishy.
Well, it was run after Bill Barr, or Donald Barr, Bill Barr's dad.
Donald Barr's his name, yeah. And he was a weirdo. Like,
Well,
he did a lot of weird shit,
Well,
right?
he was weird, but then the next headmaster started girls there too.
Didn't Bill Barr's dad, who ran that school, didn't he write some like crazy sci-fi novels about, like, what did he write? Like some crazy.
He wrote a novel, a sci-fi novel about intergalactic sex trafficking.
Yes, intergalactic sex trafficking.
And
There's the title of the podcast.
And he's got a very graphic description of a 15-year-old girl that
Right.
that's getting.
Yes, and they forced the prisoners to whatever to like this girl. We're gonna have to
Yes.
censor the out of this podcast, and so we don't get shadow banned. And then so they could use that as like blackmail on these guys for some other reason to gain power. But it was like it's so in line with these crazy stories that you're reporting on.
But here's the thing with this. Okay, so
And he also got people like that were supposed to go to some other, like were supposed to go to Harvard. He got them like, he wrote a letter to Harvard saying these people were like crazy homosexuals and that you shouldn't admit them to Harvard because they are going to cause trouble and cause mayhem.
Donald Barr was a very strange guy, and people have wondered, was there a connection between Donald Barr and Epstein prior to Donald Barr hiring Epstein? And I believe that this is the connection. I believe that Epstein. Now, here's what's bizarre about these yearbooks. These are yearbooks that do not have people's names. These yearbooks do not have their names. Now, how weird is that?
Yeah, why wouldn't they have the names?
It's the only yearbook I've ever come across in my entire life, and I'm getting up there in years, that doesn't have names. But if you look at those two guys, okay, so you can see that go up with the old bar and the new bar.
Yep, go down right there.
There we go. So if you look at them, he grew into his ears. I used to have big ears. I kind of grew into my ears. But if you look at the nose, if you look at the dimples, I mean, that's
your guy.
Is that not William Barr?
That's William Barr, 100%. I mean, it looks just like him.
Yes.
Just like the other guy looks like, I mean, just like the other kid is clearly Jeffrey Epstein.
Yes, exactly. So this is how I believe Epstein got into Dalton, is he knew the Barrs going back to 1967, and he was hired in 1974 for Dalton.
Do you think there was a plan behind bringing Jeffrey Epstein to Dalton?
It's one of those things that I just don't know.
Right.
But here's the thing. I firmly believe that Epstein was compromising these people for intelligence. Alexander Acosta was the U.S. attorney, and he was told to stand down because Epstein was intelligence. Now, there's only two people in the government that can tell a U.S. attorney to stand down. One is the president, one is the attorney general. That message can be delivered by a minion of the president or the attorney general, but it has to emanate from one of those two positions. So Epstein was locked in to some very, very powerful people.
Right.
That have a lot of juice.
Yes.
And where did that nexus occur? Did that nexus occur at Dalton? Did it occur later in Wall Street? I mean, we don't know exactly.
Well, I think there's a report of one of the girls. I think he admitted to dating girls who were attending Dalton when he was a teacher there. And all the kids that went to Dalton, their parents were the who's who of New York. Those guys were high-level Wall Street investors, Hollywood people. And they were the biggest big shots in America, basically. And I recall reading a story where one of the girls who was attending there, who was friends with Jeff when he was teaching, introduced Jeffrey to his dad, who was like a really big shot investor, and then he hired Jeffrey to work for
Bear Stearns.
That was Bear Stearns. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
That is the cover story. I don't know if, I've been looking at Jeffrey Epstein since 2012. So I've been studying Jeffrey Epstein for 14 years. Somehow he got hooked up with intelligence, and then he was on the yellow brick road. And I don't know where that occurred, but I think that the bars, those pictures that I was able to recover at Interlock, and I think that they show how it started for Epstein.
What is Bill Barr doing today? Is he still, he just endorsed Donald Trump, didn't he?
Bill Barr has been a CIA guy forever. I mean, even on his Wikipedia page, it says he was a CIA guy.
Yeah.
And he hasn't really, he's been a CIA guy forever. He was the Attorney General. Okay.
What's his title right now, though?
His title right now is...
Can you find that, Steve?
I'm retired and I'm just making a lot of money doing nothing. That's
American attorney.
Can you, if you scroll down to the right, it'll tell you his current occupation. It should at least.
I mean, he's got so many accolades.
Go back, get out of Wikipedia.
But he's represented a bunch of big companies, corporations that, I mean, he's a...
See what you can find.
He's a millionaire many times over.
Yeah.
But the thing with Bill Barr is the book that I wrote, The Franklin Scandal, A Story of Power Brokers, Child Abuse and Betrayal, which is about a child trafficking network, almost exactly like Epstein's. Bill Barr was the Attorney General under Bush 1. That covered it up.
That covered up the whole Franklin scandal.
That covered up the Franklin scandal. And then he's the Attorney General under Trump, who covers up the Epstein scandal. It's amazing that he's an Attorney General twice, and he covers up these two large interstate pedophiles.
Where did this crazy idea of using kids as blackmail for intelligence and for people in high power, political power, where did this start? And where did this all come from? Is there some place that we know in history that this sort of practice originated?
I mean, political blackmail, honey traps, are as old as politics itself. I'll give you an example. Alexander Hamilton was having an affair with a 23-year-old, and her husband was blackmailing him. And now we think of Alexander Hamilton as this hero, but yeah, he was getting blackmailed. And then there was this muckraking journalist who found out about Alexander Hamilton having an affair with this 23-year-old and getting blackmailed by her husband. And he outed him and wrote about it. And it severely tainted Alexander Hamilton. Mm-hmm. And Thomas Jefferson and Hamilton really disliked each other. So the muckraking journalist felt that he would surely get an appointment in Jefferson's administration because he outed Alexander Hamilton for having this affair. But when Jefferson became president, he did not give this muckraker an appointment. So the muckraker published an article about Jefferson having sex with one of his slaves, Sally Hemings. And actually DNA has shown that Jefferson did in fact have foster a number of children with Sally Hemings.
Jesus Christ, man.
So it goes, I mean, and we're just talking the U.S. now, the beginning of the U.S., but it goes back very far.
Oh, yeah.
And
human trafficking was big time in ancient Rome and ancient Greece.
Well, I mean, Tiberius was, and I don't know but I have read accounts of this, that Tiberius, the Roman emperor, would like to kill little boys and throw them off a cliff.
Like to kill them and throw them off a cliff.
Yeah. So I don't know. Some people have said it's true. Some people have said it's not true. But yeah, I mean, these type of pathologies are as old as humans themselves. Mm. And it's unfortunate. But now it's a different kind of a game. And I'll give you an example of two politicians that I know that have been compromised. One was a senator and one was in the House of Representatives.
Mm-hmm. Currently or no?
No, they got booted up. Larry Craig was a Republican from Idaho. And he was a family values guy, very conservative. Actually, I think that he might have had the worst record of voting against gay rights of any person in the Senate. And he had been in Washington, D.C. for 25 years. And part of it as in the House of Representatives, but then he ultimately became a senator. Mm-hmm. And I wrote a book called Confessions of a D.C. Madam, The Politics of Sex, Lies, and Blackmail, and about a guy running a gay escort service that was giving escorts to CIA assets to compromise politicians. Mm-hmm. Well, Craig was getting escorts from this guy. And there was a documentary.
From who?
From Henry Vincent, the guy who I wrote the book with.
Okay.
And Craig was getting escorts from Henry Vincent, but there was a documentary called Outraged by Kirby Dick about how really conservative, closeted guys vote against gay rights. And he found other guys that Craig was giving money to for male escorts.
Male escorts.
Yeah.
That's so funny. That's so true.
So here's what happened to Craig. So here's a guy that's been in Washington, D.C. for 25 years, and he's getting escorts from a guy that I wrote the book with, and he's getting escorts from other people. And what he got busted in Minneapolis. There's an international airport in Minneapolis. I'm from Minneapolis, and he was. I guess there's like this gay nomenclature where someone hits her foot. If they're sitting on the commode and they hit their foot on the ground, and then that signals to the other guy that they're hot, that he's hot to trot. So that's what happened with Larry Craig. He got busted in a bathroom in the Minneapolis airport trying to pick up a Vice Squad cop.
Wow. That's fucking crazy. There's that famous Joe Rogan joke where he says there's only two people who hate gays. Morons and guys who secretly love dick but won't admit it.
Well, here's the thing with I go to Minneapolis about once a year. I mean, that's where I'm from. And I was sitting on the commode once, and some guy was in the booth next to me slapping his foot. And I thought he had a neurological disorder. I'm just really glad I didn't say, "Hey, could I help you? Do you need some help?"
Oh, God.
And let's talk about Dennis Hastert. Okay, so he was the Speaker of the House.
Okay.
Constitutionally, third most powerful man in the country. He had been boys going.
What year?
He was the Speaker of the House from 1999 to 2006, but he'd been in the House for quite some time. He was a strong-arm guy. He really strong-armed people into voting the way that he felt like they should vote. Now, he had been a wrestling coach in high school, and he started kids back then, like 40 years earlier. And the FBI knew what he was up to because there was a FBI whistleblower that said that they knew about Dennis Hastert's shadow life. So when he was the Speaker of the House, he was engaged in this and nothing happened to him. But after he got out, one of his victims started blackmailing him. And he ultimately started taking money out of his bank account under false pretenses and giving it to this blackmail victim, or this victim of his who was blackmailing him. Mm-hmm. But the FBI went after Hastert instead of this kid or this victim, which is kind of interesting because the FBI could have just stopped it right there and said, if you blackmail Dennis Hastert, we're going to put you away forever. But they went after Hastert instead. And I've always wondered, so I think using the yacht analogy, what happened to Hastert? Why did he decide to get off the yacht?
Right.
I don't know. I think he got too greedy. He was making millions of dollars. And he had this consulting business and he was making millions of dollars. And I think that some powerful people wanted a cut. And he just said, "No, I'm Dennis Hastert. Go to hell." And that's what happened to Dennis Hastert.
Wow. Serial child. Federal judge imposed a sentence of 15 months in prison, 2 years supervised release. That's it.
15 months. Holy shit.
15 months and $250,000 fine.
And I've tried to get a hold of him. I've got his cell phone number, but he doesn't really want to talk to me.
Yeah, no shit.
I'll give you an example of an amazing cover-up. When David Boies started to take on Epstein's victims as clients, he brought in Stan Pottinger. And Pottinger was an associate attorney general. And I call him the Forrest Gump of cover-ups. If there's a cover-up, Stan Pottinger is there. Like with Wounded Knee, a bunch of Native Americans took over Wounded Knee, which had been the site of a slaughter. And Stan Pottinger went after them, and the two, Russell Means and Dennis Banks, were the head of the American Native Movement, and Stan Pottinger went after them really hard. But the judge found that the feds were lying about a number of different things, and he dropped all the charges against him. Stan Pottinger was also married, or a boyfriend to Gloria Steinm for like 9 years. And Steinm was a CIA asset. It's amazing that all these women that look up to Steinm and they see her as the pinnacle of women's liberation. Well, actually, she was CIA. Now, she said that she stopped getting money from the CIA in 1961, but I've come across an article that says that she she was getting money from the CIA throughout the 1960s.
Wow.
And there was, according to Ari Ben Menashe, who was a Israeli spy.
Right.
There was, actually, Pottinger was part of the Iran-Contra cover-up. And October Surprise, are you familiar with the October Surprise?
Yes.
Okay.
There was the hostages that
yes.
Bless you. The hostages that were over there, and then they didn't want to release him until after he won the presidency.
Okay, so the CIA,
right? Is that right or no?
William Casey and George Bush made a deal with the Iranians. And they said, if you keep the hostages till after Ronald Reagan is elected president, we'll sell you cheap arms. Mm-hmm. And we were selling arms to Saddam Hussein, and he was having a war against the Iranians. So we were selling arms to both sides. Right. But that was called the October Surprise. And what's really interesting, Stan Pottinger was in on the October Surprise, according to Ari Ben Menashe. And that was an amazing cover-up because there were actually congressional subcommittees that looked into it and concluded that it didn't exist, even though the New York Times in March published an article that said that there was an October Surprise. So finally, all these years later, but it's amazing how you can have so many congressmen driven in one way to say that there was no October Surprise when there so obviously was. But Stan Pottinger, who ended up representing these Epstein victims with David Boies, he was busted helping Iranians get arms, showing Iranians how to smuggle arms from the United States to Iran without getting in any trouble. And they had him on, this is kind of, actually, it's humorous. It's tragic, but it's humorous. Our Justice Department had tapes of him telling these Iranians how best to smuggle arms into Iran without getting busted.
Really?
And that paragon of integrity, Rudolph Giuliani, was the U.S. attorney overseeing that case, and they lost the tapes of Stan Pottinger. Now, you would think that they would come up with something more creative.
Right.
But anyway, so the tapes were lost, and Stan walked, and then he started representing all these Epstein victims. So it's very obvious that Epstein was definitely intelligence, and then intelligence assets were brought in to make sure that the cover-up was on the other side.
It seems also like it wasn't just one intelligence service. It seems like there was a ton of them. It seemed like it was a combination of CIA, Mossad, Saudi, like at least those three, right?
Well, people ask me, was the Mossad involved? And I say to them, I don't know. I mean, it could have been, but here's the thing about that. There's no way the CIA is going to let the Mossad compromise American politicians on American soil without getting a cut of that intelligence. Uh-huh. I mean, there's no way.
Well,
because the Israelis rely on us so heavily for armaments that the Mossad and the CIA are going to work together on that. I don't think the Mossad is going to compromise American politicians.
But the Mossad is so much better than the CIA. They're so much more efficient than the CIA, and I think that's one of the things that the CIA is frustrated about.
I don't know. The CIA can be very effective. I mean, just talk to Guatemala and Chile and Indonesia, and
for sure,
it just goes on and on. I mean, when the CIA really wants to foment a coup, they get rid of guys. So and they specialize in regime changes. So the CIA can be very effective.
That's a great point. They have been very effective, but when it comes to American politics, I don't think there's anyone more effective than the Mossad. If you talk, there was a recent interview that came out with a congressman. He did it. I forget his name. You could probably find it, Steve. He did an interview with Tucker Carlson, and he was basically telling Tucker, he's like, every single one of us has a CIA or a handler from Israel. Or it was the what's the organization called? The APEC. We all have our own APEC handlers.
Yeah, I mean,
so and then John Mearsheimer, wrote that whole book about the Israel lobby and how Israel has so much influence over our politics and our laws and everything involving our media and all this stuff, to even to their own detriment.
I think that they work together. This is kind of interesting. When I was talking to Gas Pipe all those years ago in the subterranean digs. The Russian Mafia had this amazing scam where, a gallon of gasoline was taxed 25 cents at that point. And what the Russian Mafia did was they would sell all this gasoline and they wouldn't pay the tax, and then they would declare bankruptcy. So what happened was we changed our laws where the wholesalers had to pay the tax on the gasoline instead of the retailers. And what the Russians were doing is they created a daisy chain of companies that would defer the tax and defer the tax and defer the tax. And then you'd end up with Juan Gonzalez in Tijuana that had to pay all the taxes on the gasoline. And what Gas Pipe told me, and this was my first real inkling of how dirty the Mossad was, that there was a Mossad guy that was working with the Colombo family, and he shot this Colombo Mafia guy in the back of the head, and then Gas Pipe, because they made like $1 billion on this. It was an amazing scam. And the Russians started doing it, and then all the American crime families followed them. And so Joseph Reich, a Mossad guy, was part of this scam. And he shot a guy, I can't think of the gangster's name, and we wanted to extradite him, but Israel wouldn't do it. But then Israel tried the guy in an Israel court, and amazingly, an Israel court didn't find a Mossad guy guilty of murder.
Wow. So, who was the guy? I think we talked about this on the phone. Who was the Israeli spy who was in prison? He was in a U.S. prison, and then they tried to get Clinton. I think it was Israel tried to get Clinton to release him back to Israel. Clinton couldn't do it, and then Trump actually ended up getting him out. And then not only that, but it was the billionaire. We talked about this person on the phone. He was a billionaire who owned an NBA team. He died, and then his wife is now the one who just gave Trump $100 million. What's this person's name again?
God, I can't think of his name.
God.
Pull it up for us,
Steve. Can you find who just gave Trump $100 million?
Okay, who gave Trump
$100 million?
100 million.
It was in exchange for the liberation of Miriam Adelson. That's what it was.
Yeah.
So Miriam Adelson's husband was the one. I think he gave Trump during his first campaign like $10 million or something, and then Trump got this fucking Israeli spy out of prison and sent him back, and then literally flew the guy back on Adelson's jet.
Back
to Israel.
Pardoned. Yeah.
And now Miriam Adelson just gave Trump $100 million. And one of the contingents of that $100 million was to give them liberate the West Bank or something like that, a genocide in the West Bank, essentially.
Well, it's interesting. I interviewed Ari Ben-Menashe on my podcast, and Israel tried to say he wasn't an Israeli spy, but he's definitely an Israeli spy. And actually, our government said that there was an October surprise, because he said he participated in the October surprise. He met with Pottinger, and our government said there was an October surprise, but now we're conceding that there is an October surprise.
Right.
And he's a spy, so a former spy, or maybe it's difficult to know with guys like that. But he said, but the New York Times corroborated this. The Israelis were aware of that attack for over a year, or for around a year, before it actually went down.
Wow.
And Ari Ben-Menashe told me that, and then all of a sudden the New York Times came out with an article about it. So he has been corroborated on a number of different points.